Okay, is it coming through? Okay. Well, as I was sitting in the pew and kind of reviewing what I had written down and my notes to go on, I kind of occurred to me I didn't have down on there to pray first. I thought it'd be kind of foolish if I didn't. So if you give me a moment here, well, thank God. First off, I'd like to thank you, God, for pastors. I think anytime anyone's asked to get up in front of a room full of people to speak or bring a message or try and convey what God has done in your life or their lives, there's always a sense of anxiety, the pressure of putting it together and coordinating your thoughts and conveying a message of meaning and God's word. So I'd like to give thanks for all the people who take on ministry as a livelihood. It's a challenge to get up there Sunday by Sunday and always find a way to bring a fresh message and to bring new information. So I thank you for all those people who have committed themselves to that practice. And I'd also like to thank all the lay people who are willing to step up. I'm glad I'm in a congregation of people who come together but aren't afraid to stand up and be open about what God has done in their life. So I give thanks for them as well. And I just pray for your wisdom, God, as I go forth, that you'll coordinate my thoughts and give me a good day up here. So with that, and thanks, God, let's proceed. Amen. All right. Well, I'm going to read two Bible passages. First is Genesis 1, verses 27 through 28. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that God moves upon the earth." The second one is Luke chapter 6, verses 26 through 27. "But I say to you that hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. To him who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from him who takes away your cloak, do not even withhold your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you, and of him who takes away your goods, do not ask of them again. And as you wish that men would do to you, do also to them. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies and do good. Lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High. For he is kind to the ungrateful and to the selfish. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful." So in light of those two, I guess I would say, do you see a correlation between them? Probably not, because they don't really seem to have anything to do with each other. But hopefully by the end of this, you might see where I'm getting on. As you guys know, I farm for a living. And I thought farming is kind of an interesting way to make a living, in the fact that it involves both a lot of variety and a lot of repetition. The seasons change, the crops change, there's harvest, there's planting, there's livestock, and the different things that come with it. But in fact, each one of those seasons of things involve an awful lot of repetition, especially if you've ever sat on a cultivator for 2 days in a row, going back and forth, literally just looking at a row of corn for hours on end. What that does afford you, though, is a little time for contemplation. I know a lot of people in most lives might take time for solitude and prayer, meditation, just to kind of tune the world out and be alone with your own thoughts. And I thought, well, farming in a weird kind of way allows you the same opportunity to be alone with your own thoughts, and in many ways to be alone with God, especially when you're outside doing this as a living, because you're surrounded by nature and different things of the world. It's kind of hard not to have your mind drift to what God does in our lives, because you're surrounded by a growing crop, maybe a newborn calf, and different things that remind you of what God's doing in the world. You're away from the things of man, and you're into the things of God by being in nature. So one of the things we have is livestock, and we raise hogs. And every 2 or 3 days, I have to grind a load of hog feed. Well, about 3 years ago, where I grind hog feed at, there's a series of switches on the grain bin. And I was trying to remind myself when I was up here to keep my hands down. So don't get too antsy with that. But as we do the grinding hog feed, there's a series of switches that run the various augers to fill the grain bin. Well, there are next to the bin, there's a little bit of grass growing around there. And as usual, about midsummer, a spider made a web in there. And as you know, you ever seen those black and yellow spiders that we're all familiar with that love to grow midsummer and get larger as the fall goes on? One of them decided to take up nest right there where my switches were located. So obviously it began to get small, not a big issue. And like I said, small spiders don't bother me, but I think most of us, once you get to a certain size, for some reason it causes a different level of aversion. And as you know, those black and yellow spiders, if they're fed well, they continue to grow. Well, as my summer progressed from July into August into September, this spider and I kind of got to be friends there. And I always found it kind of odd. I thought, this whole world this thing could be in, why does it choose to be here? It chose to be there, and that's where it was. Within 12 inches of where my switches were every day, there sits this black and yellow spider whenever I have to grind hog feed, and I got to run the switches, and I get close, and it twitches, and I twitch, and then we go through this little dance on a regular basis. And it always bothered me because, I said, there was a memory from when I was a young kid. At the end of the year, when I was probably 6 years old, we were cleaning out the garden for the last time, and my grandmother had come out from town, and we were going through the garden. And as we got done going through the garden and kind of gleaning the last of it out, we went to the house, and she took off her coat and laid it down in the house, and there was one black and yellow spider about 3 inches across sitting right in the back of her coat, and it had been on there for I don't even know how long. So when you look at that image up close, what's your first reaction? I guess make a mental note what you think when you see that image right now. Do you want to be close to it? Do you want to be near it? Do you want to be around it in any way? It's a pretty normal reaction, and for some people it's snakes, it could be rats. There's a lot of things in this world that we look at, you have a visceral reaction to. They just cause something in you to say, I don't like it. I just don't like it. And that was the way I felt with this black and yellow spider. Well, you can go ahead and take it down. It might be distracting. I said, I don't, it could be distracting to me to know that's behind me as I'm standing up here. So as the summer progressed on, the spider's there and it's growing. And finally, I don't know why, but one day I was looking at it, and before I went to hit the switch again, it's like God just kind of gives you those little epiphanies in a little moment. And it's almost like God asked me a question. He said, why do you hate the spider? Well, why? I mean, really, try and think about it from a logical standpoint. What is the spider doing? What is it about it that I don't like, that I considered it to be bad, evil, unlovable, unlikable? We just do. I don't know. Is it some primal thing to perceive it as a threat? I mean, they're poisonous, but no one's ever been bit by one of those spiders and died from it, or even had any probably ill effects. Matter of fact, I don't know if you even get bit by them, and they may not even be capable of it. They simply do nothing but live their lives and eat bugs and go about their business. And what kind of hit me at that point was, if that's how I viewed the spider, how does God view me? Or how did God view me before Christianity became this point in my life? What did God see when he looked at me? Was I any less horrible in God's eyes? Are any of us any different in God's eyes? Because when I think about how God looks at us, what's really important to remember is he doesn't look at our clothes, he doesn't look at our haircut, he doesn't see us for us in the flesh. I think when God looks at us, he sees past that and he immediately sees this soul, this persona that's dwelling within the flesh, but that's what God sees. He sees your heart. He knows what you feel, he knows what you think. He knows what you truly desire, what you don't desire, what you want to do, what you don't want to do. All those things that we think are hidden from the world, and which we can hide from the world, can't be hidden from him. And that's what God sees. So when I think about a perfect God looking down on the world and looking at his creation of people, does he see anything that's any less disturbing or troubling or terrifying than the image that you saw up on the screen? Are we not any worse in his eyes? Then I thought, how do we see our fellow man, especially our enemies? How do we immediately perceive those who we disagree with, those who hold different political views, different social views, different societies, different cultures, different ways of being around each other? How do we view those who don't fall into our camp, the ones we don't necessarily find ourselves agreeing with on everything in life? It's kind of easy when you sit in this room because you can say, well, we have a commonality of belief and culture and background and music and all these things that come together that are in common. It's very easy to look at around us and say, well, I like you. You're as easy to love as a kitten. Who doesn't? We all come to terms on each other. But how do we get when we get out into the world? We find ourselves in contrast with those who aren't like us. So I guess the question is, back to Luke, what does it mean to love your enemy? What is Christ talking about when he says in Luke to love your enemy? And first off, I think you really got to get back to the word love. And this is one case where I think the English language really falls short. If you know, a lot of the original texts were translated from Greek, which was a common language used to dispense the letters that were written during the New Testament, because that was a common language throughout the Middle East. So when they used love in the Greek language, as many of you already know, they had eros, which is romantic love, and you had philos, which is brotherly love for your own family or close friends. And obviously you all know agape love, which is that broad love that God has for humanity and that we're called to have for our fellow humans. We're called to find a brotherhood and a commonality with those that are also created in God's image. So that's where I think the word love has been so distorted by the English language, especially in America, to be so focused on a romantic relationship. And I think if we can step back from that and keep ourselves in a mindset of that agape love of everything that God is talking about. So that's kind of what I'm trying to focus on as I go through this. So when God says to love your enemy, is he saying you're supposed to accept them as they are and do nothing about it? Are we called by Christianity to actually stand for something? But doesn't that put us in conflict with people who disagree with us? Won't that lead to conflict? Probably. But are we also supposed to see them as they are, made in God's image, but lost? Because we are all made in God's image, as we said in Genesis. All of humanity was created by God, in God's image, to bear his likeness, and to be part of the greatest aspect of creation, which is humankind. Of all the trees, of all the mountains, of all the valleys, they all pale in comparison to what God created when God created man, because we're the only ones that bear his likeness. We're also the only ones that bear that indwelling of the Holy Spirit. We're unique in that respect, and that's why mankind represents the pinnacle of God's creation. So when Luke, he talks about, I'm going to jump back to that quick, if you have it open yet. But in Luke, verse 6, chapter 28, to him who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other. And from him who takes away your cloak, do not even withhold your shirt. So I guess, Steve, if you wouldn't mind being a good sport, could I call you into participation for a second? So Steve represents someone else in the world. He could be a neighbor, he could be a coworker, he could be someone you have a chance encounter with as you go through life. So if I'm going through my life, and maybe Steve's my neighbor, and we're in a state of conflict. I'm a Christian, Steve's not. He doesn't understand why you can't work on Sunday. It's a big deal. I run my business. That's where my best day is at my restaurant is a Sunday afternoon. So you have a conflict, and you find yourself in disagreement with on how you should be conducting your life and how the world should be going on. Now, the Bible talks about the physical striking on the cheek, but if we got into an argument, and we got into a disagreement, and we walked away in bad terms, first off, for us to get into an argument, do I have to be in proximity to you? Well, I mean, generally, if you and I are going to argue, we have to. You don't have to. Technology would allow us not to. But for the most part, we're next door neighbors. We get into a conflict, I'm there. What's the first requisite for that to happen? Well, first off, I have to be talking to Steve. In some manner, I have to at least be in a relationship with him, even if it's a bad one. I actually have to be in some sort of contact and relationship with Steve, not in a state of seclusion. Now, if you told me to get ready, I'm mad, give me the finger, tell me to walk off, and that's it. At that point, do I cut my ties? When he says turn the other cheek, I thought it's interesting. What does that imply, to turn the other cheek? You're going to take another blow, right? But at the same time, I still have to be here. True. If I just evacuate the situation and say, well, I'm going to retreat back to my church with people I get along with, the people I agree with, the people I like, who all go to the same place, listen to the same music, say the same things, have the same agreements on how to worship, whether we should be Catholic or Baptist or Covenant. We go down the list, but I find this group that we're all the same, and I have this nice little cozy relationship. That's awfully comfortable and easy. So what Christ is really talking about when he says love your enemies, it doesn't necessarily mean that, well, I guess it's fine, go to work on Sunday. No, I can still argue with you. I may still continue to have that argument, and it may persist, but I'm also going to continue to pursue a relationship with you and anybody else I find myself in conflict with. So you can sit down. Sorry. Well, that wasn't the end. No. But that's when I read that verse in Luke, it just kind of struck me. I thought, you can't get struck in the other cheek if you leave. You have to still be there. We still have to be a part of this world. When you look at what Christ did, he continued to be in the world. When we talk about our enemies, if you really truly find someone to be an enemy, and I guess in this context we're talking about, in terms of faith, your enemies, the non-believer, an agnostic, an atheist, even those who are openly against God, adamantly against God. Are they really your enemy? Are they truly fighting against you? No, they're fighting against God. But you are a representation of what God is in this world. And if you live out that Christian life, they're going to see you as a representation of that, and they'll attack that, or at least be repulsed by that. Because in their eyes, you're the spider. You represent everything that they can't stand. It causes discomfort, revulsion. They want to be away from you because being around you causes them to be uncomfortable. Just as uncomfortable as you would be if that spider had been crawling on your leg. So when you think about the sacrifice Christ made when he died for the sins of us, how much did Christ have to love us when we were unlovable? Because the reality is, we don't come to Christ after we clean ourselves up to be saved. You can't wash away your sin and then go say, well, I'd like to be a Christian right now. We come to God as the most unlovable thing we could possibly be. And he says, I'll take care of it. Because I'm going to love you even when you're unlovable. And that, to me, always magnified the sacrifice that Christ made on the cross. Because he did it even though he did it when we weren't worthy. Not because he saw something in us worth redeeming. He says, I will make you worth redeeming. I'm going to take this fallen creation that he was a part of from the beginning in Genesis. When he saw this perfect creation fall from grace and become ugly, and he says, I'm going to make it beautiful again. So, would you put the image back up again? I asked you at the beginning to make a mental note of what you thought when you saw that image. If that was in close proximity to you, how would you view it? Initially, I didn't like it. I don't think any of us would feel comfortable with it. But at the end of this little epiphany with me and the black and yellow spiders, I'm standing next to the grain bin to grind another load of hog feed. I looked at the spider and I thought, okay, who made it? God did. He crafted every one of those 6 eyes. 2 of the large ones are for long distance. The smaller ones are for close proximity. They can see different spectrum of light. They can weave a web. And silk is stronger than steel on a pound-for-pound basis. They're amazing creatures. And what do they do other than eat insects, which I'm happy to see go? In what way is a spider an enemy to me? But give it 8 legs, a bunch of hair, and 6 eyes, and all of a sudden I find myself in a state of revulsion. But everything about a spider is, quite frankly, beneficial to my life. And I found myself looking at the spider saying, well, I may not want to hold you, but at the same time I found myself not hating the spider. And it's funny how it changed everything about how I felt. And it all kind of tied into this idea of how does God view me? And how does God view us as lost and then saved? So I guess when it comes back to Genesis, when God created us in our image, when God created us in his image, he created the most wonderful thing in the world. And at times this creation of God's can be far uglier than that. And we're seeing it sometimes, I think, played out to a greater extent today. It's magnified by media. It's magnified by the internet. It's magnified by Twitter. And we're seeing so many times the worst of people. And we're confronted with what may be the worst of people. Can we see them in a different light and see them as a fallen creation of God that still has value, that Christ is willing to die for? Surely we can find it in our hearts to love them and, at the very least, stand beside them for one more day. And maybe you take one more blow to the cheek. But you know, if it takes 50 and they come to salvation, it'll all be worth it. The same way everything Christ did on the cross was worth it for us to be saved. And that's all I got.